All right, so today we're going to dig into a really fascinating political puzzle. And that puzzle is Hungary. You see, it's a country where, if you look at the polls, people consistently and really strongly support being in the European Union. But, and this is the big but, its leader, Viktor Orbán, has basically built his entire political career on being one of the EU's loudest, fiercest critics. So, what gives? How does that even work?
I mean, really, think about that for a second. How can a leader get away with constantly bashing an institution that the majority of his own country actually supports? And not just for a year or two, we're talking for over a decade, all while winning election after election. And what about the voters? How do you square that circle in your head, loving the EU but voting for its biggest critic? Well, the answer, according to the research we're looking at today, comes down to a really powerful political strategy.
And that strategy has a name. Political scientists call it performing crisis. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The goal isn't actually to solve problems. No, the goal is to narrate those problems, to turn them into these epic life-or-death struggles for the nation's very survival. And to pull it off, you need three things. First, you need a constant feeling of crisis. Second, you need a bad guy, a clear enemy to blame everything on. And third, you need to position yourself as the strong leader, the only one who can save the people from that threat.
So, to see how this all plays out, we're going to break down the last decade and a half of Hungarian politics like a 5-act play. We'll look at the crisis performance, and then we'll walk through 3 acts: the economic enemy, the cultural threat, and the illiberal war. And we'll end with a pretty recent plot twist, a new challenger on the scene.
Okay, so, Act 1, the economic enemy, from 2010 to 2014. The curtain goes up in 2010. Orbán is back in power, and the backdrop is the 2008 global financial crisis, which, absolutely hammered Hungary. It was the perfect stage to launch this whole crisis performance. So who is the villain of this first act? Well, it wasn't some vague concept like market forces. Oh no, the enemy was made out to be very, very specific.
And the script here was incredibly simple. It's a classic us versus them. Us was defined as the good, honest, hardworking Hungarian people. And them? Well, that was a whole crew of villains. Foreign corporations, giant banks, the IMF, and, of course, you guessed it, those so-called Brussels bureaucrats who were painted as being in the pockets of big money instead of the people.
And Orbán's own words really hammer this home. This quote here is a perfect example of how he framed himself as this defiant warrior protecting the nation. Listen to the language. It's not the language of a boring policy debate, right? It's a battle cry. It's designed to tap into that feeling of national pride. The message was clear. He wasn't just fiddling with the economy. He was fighting a war for Hungary's soul.
And this is the crucial part. This whole crisis story wasn't just talk. It was the justification for some really radical, pretty controversial policies. For example, they brought in these special crisis taxes that just so happened to hit sectors with a lot of foreign ownership, like banking and energy. They nationalized private pensions. They packed the government with party loyalists. And see, that's the thing. When you convince people they're in a fight for their lives, these kinds of drastic moves start to look not just reasonable, but totally necessary.
Okay, moving on to Act 2, the cultural threat, from 2015 to 2018. So by 2015, the whole economic crisis story was getting a little old. It was losing its punch. The playbook needed a refresh. It needed a new crisis and a new enemy to keep the show on the road. And then, almost as if on cue, the European refugee crisis happened, providing the perfect next chapter. And just like that, the entire focus shifts, away from money and onto culture. And check this out, because this chart shows you that pivot in plain sight. Just look at the data from Orbán's speeches. The economy theme? It just shrinks away. But then, look at the migration theme. It absolutely explodes after 2014. This wasn't some slow, organic change in priorities. No, this was a hard turn, a very deliberate, strategic shift.
So, a new crisis means a new cast. The definition of us got a rewrite. It wasn't just about being a hardworking Hungarian anymore. Now it was about being an ethno-cultural Hungarian, a defender of a, quote, 1,000-year-old Christian civilization. This was about drawing a line in the sand, a cultural border. And the enemies? Well, you had Muslim migrants, painted as a direct threat to that Christian identity. You had the multicultural EU, and a brand new supervillain entered the stage, the so-called Soros network of NGOs.
And the language, wow, it got even more stark. Orbán didn't talk about migration as a complex issue, a humanitarian or logistical challenge. Not at all. He framed it as a straight-up security threat. He explicitly connected immigration with crime and terrorism, something that was basically a taboo for a lot of other European leaders back then.
But here's the wild part, the thing that really shows you how much of this was a performance. While all this intense rhetoric was happening, Hungary had virtually no migrants. It wasn't a destination they were trying to get to. It was just a country they passed through. So the threat wasn't really about what was happening on the ground in Hungary. It was being manufactured, completely constructed for political effect.
And this number right here just puts it all into perspective. This whole massive political drama about an existential threat, about Christian civilization being overrun, all of it was mobilized to fight an EU plan that would have asked Hungary to accept, wait for it, 1,294 refugees. That tiny number was blown up and framed as the first step towards the complete destruction of the nation. It's pretty incredible.
All right, let's get to Act 3, the illiberal war from 2018 up to 2022. Now the performance gets even bigger. It's not about one single issue anymore. The enemy becomes much more vague, more abstract. The enemy is now liberalism itself, and its main cheerleader, the European Union. And this is where Orbán's playbook really starts to diverge from some other European populists by taking the culture war from the border and bringing it right into the heart of Hungarian society.
So the enemy list just got longer and longer. You suddenly had these new threats popping up everywhere, things like gender ideology or rainbow propaganda. These were presented as a direct attack from Brussels on the traditional family. So simple EU gender equality policies? Nope. Now they were an existential threat. And at the same time, anyone who dared to challenge the government, whether it was the EU complaining about rule of law or just the political opposition at home, they all got thrown onto the same big list of enemies of the nation.
So what happens when a real, actual global crisis hits, like the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, it just gets sucked right into the pre-existing story. Orbán immediately framed it as a war on two fronts. Sure, one front was against the virus, but the other front was just the same old political war. Brussels got blamed for messing up the EU's vaccine program, while state-controlled media praised Orbán as a hero for getting vaccines from Russia and China. The message was simple. The nation stands strong while the EU fails.
And as you can imagine, the language got even more heated, more aggressive. We're way past simple political disagreement now. In the middle of this performed war, any kind of criticism was painted as actual treason. And this is so important for holding on to power, because once you label your opponents as traitors, well, that gives you the justification you need to shut them down.
Okay, so for more than 10 years, this playbook looked like it was unstoppable. But, you know, every great drama needs a good plot twist. And in 2024, that's exactly what happened. A couple of big scandals hit the government, and suddenly a brand new, completely unexpected challenger steps onto the stage and looks ready to rip up the whole script.
Okay, let's just look at the numbers from the recent European Parliament elections. Now, Orbán's Fidesz party, they did still come in first place. But, and this is a huge but, something totally new happened. This brand new party, TISZA, pretty much came out of nowhere and grabbed almost 30% of the vote. That completely changed the game for the opposition.
And this is the number you really need to see, 44.82%. Now, for almost any other party in Europe, that's a great result, right? A solid win. But for Fidesz, this was their worst result in a European election in 20 years. It was maybe the first real sign that some cracks were starting to appear in this supposedly invincible political machine.
So who is the person behind this political earthquake? His name is Péter Magyar, and get this, he's a former Fidesz insider. He was part of the system, and then he turned on it. He basically tapped into all this frustration people had, not just with the government, but with the old, weak opposition too. And his rise was just meteoric. He went from a complete unknown to Orbán's #1 challenger in just a few weeks. Nobody, and I mean nobody, saw this coming.
And that brings us to our final scene, and a big question mark. For over a decade, this play, this performance of constant crisis, has been the only show in town in Hungary. But now, with a new challenger on the scene, someone who knows the playbook inside and out, you have to wonder, are we watching the final act? Or maybe the real question is, after all these years, is the audience simply getting tired of the show?